Tell me, what do you think happens to a person when the very concept of peace is taken away from them? Regardless of your answer, this question only ends in one place. You either crumble in the carnage or live long enough to see yourself become the very thing you hate. And today, we're looking at two characters who decided that whether it meant becoming a monster or giving up everything, they would chase their dream to destroy the world they hate. So who would win if the Titan that fights on for the sake of freedom crossed paths with the strongest kaiju in all recorded history? Well, I'll tell you one thing. Eren Yeager vs Kaiju No 8 isn't close. Now, hopefully if you've watched even a minute of anime during your lifetime, you probably know a thing or two about this guy right here, the Attack Titan himself. He's practically one of the four pillars of gateway anime after all, even ignoring his brief stint in the meme scene. Obviously, in comparison to someone like that, this goofball Kafka probably isn't on too many people's radar unless you're knee-deep in the shonen scene, or you've been stalking Crunchyroll to feed your newfound anime addiction. So just let me reiterate for all those unaware. Kafka Hibino and Eren Yeager are two extraordinarily similar individuals who went down barely diverging paths that led to two entirely different outcomes. Both were young children with soon-to-be overpowered female love interests that experienced a terrible tragedy at the hands of kaiju and titans, respectively, setting them both on a sworn path of vengeance to unalive their enemies. Eren, of course, went on to see the front lines as an edgy teenager, causing him to grow up into a traumatized half-adult, half-titan who literally genocided half the world. Whereas Kafka was effectively rejected from the military, turning him into the one-man kaiju cleanup crew until his early 30s, before also getting slightly less traumatized and turning into an equally less traumatizing hybrid kaiju. So yeah, they're both men turned monsters who face-punch other monsters. Meaning, at face value, this fight can basically be summed up in two parts. Who's got the better monster powers, and who face punches better. Fortunately for us, Attack on Titan is one of the most internally consistent and well planned out shonen stories of all time. And Kaiju no 8, obviously taking a lot of inspiration from it, follows that same path, giving us plenty of information to answer both questions. So let's just go over who you're all here for first, to see if a kaiju can really stack up to a titan. Eren Yeager and his powers in the world of AOT fall under the umbrella of Titan Shifting, a power which, when granted by the founder Ymir, allows a regular human to transform to a Titan, a 50-foot tall, genderless humanoid permanently stuck in an unclothed persuasion. Initially, Eren only had access to the all-American, freedom-loving Attack Titan, which stood as a 15-meter-tall, conventionally indestructible, fleshy beacon of patriotism that would make Liberty Prime proud. This made him capable of things such as high-level regeneration, manifesting armor-like crystals across his skin, and even granted him access to the unique trait of Future Sight, as Ymir allowed anyone with this Titan to see the past, present, and future through the lens of the Paths, a place existing outside of the timeline, granting Eren the highest degree of knowledge one could possibly have in a fight, since he effectively knows everything, and always will. So, in any real context where risking an L might conflict with his plans, he probably doesn't even show up in character. But that's a pretty boring answer, so let's ignore that option for now. Especially because the Attack Titan is the weakest power of the three he can manifest. Since anyone who watched the rampage of Mr. himself unfold upon the world would know that Eren had also consumed and taken the power of the formerly mentioned Ymir, which effectively granted him the powers and abilities of all other Titans. as well as granting Eren what could only really be described as a degree of omnipotence when it specifically comes to Ymir's chosen people, the Eldians, since he, through the paths, can step out of the timeline and use his founder abilities to bestow, manipulate, or control any number of things within or upon his fellow man. Because, as most people already know, the Titans who tormented the world of AOT were at one point simply Eldians like Eren himself, people converted into monstrous, man-eating forms by the power of the Founder. So obviously, if Eren could mold a regular human into a Titan, he can pretty much alter anything in their biology, ranging from infertility to straight-up euthanasia. But this power can still extend beyond that, to outright affect the deepest parts of a victim's thoughts, hopes, and dreams, if Eren wished it so. Obviously though, Kafka isn't an Eldian, so why did I bother bringing up all of Eren's founder abilities that wouldn't work on him? Well, it's quite simple. Although Kafka isn't an Eldian, he is one. So any power or quality Eren seeks to have, it's already his. And any knowledge or technique he seeks, he probably already has that too. If Eren wanted to become just like the colossal titan who tore down the walls, or grow a pair of wings just like the Jaw, he could do it in an instant. As the founder of all other titans, Eren could basically command Ymir to create him a body with literally any quality we've ever seen another titan possess, without really any other limitations, aside from it needing to obey the laws of physics, and having a weak point placed in the back of the nape for the pilot to sit. Although, even that could just be Ymir's Death Star level engineering at play instead. On a different note though, if you recall what I said earlier about altering the body of Eldians, we know Eren is also more than capable of manipulating himself, no Titan required. So chop off his hand, he could grow it back. Poison him, he could probably get it out. And try to fry his brain on some Gojo energy, he could probably undo that too. And while I did say that none of this functionality would really work on Kafka, if you wanted to stretch the series' lore, considering that the origin of the Founder's power is literally referred to as the source of all living matter, alongside some off comments about the paths only being connected to the Eldians through choice, there's an unironic argument to be had there if you want to talk about Eren potentially being able to basically control all life on Earth. Although, in my own opinion, I do think something like that would heavily go against the wider context of the story, but be your own judge there. As for Eren's stats in Titan mode, it's pretty consistent to say that the Titan shifters fight at supersonic speeds. The most obvious evidence is when we see human Eren react to a cannonball mid-air and proceed to transform fast enough to intercept it only hours after becoming the attack Titan. And from there, whether you look at the Beast Titan making sonic booms with his bare hands, the regular fodder humans constantly getting blitzed despite using 1/3 the speed of sound ODM gear, or even stuff like Titan form Eren and Libero dodging multiple rounds of cannon fire, it's pretty much a straight up fact that these guys can move at Mach speeds in combat. Of course, the same is also true of the general power level in this verse, with start of series Eren being able to Kool-Aid man his way through buildings on accident, then getting power cliffed by the armored Titan, who his punches couldn't even damage, before flipping the script with some crystal brass knuckles to one-tap the armor back. This is important because the armored Titan's defense, as well as Eren's later Titan form to a much lesser extent, directly tank the damage of the Colossal Titan's transformation, which is basically akin to a nuclear explosion set off directly where he appears. Yet despite the armor's insane resistance, an early Eren was still shattering that guy's face like we mentioned, implying to some extent that Eren's physical potency might scale up to a nigh atomic level in his regular 15-meter form, which was later knocked halfway across the Shiganshina district in one hit by a colossal titan, the same kind that would later be dwarfed by Eren's true titan form nearly 7 times over, making an endgame rumbling Eren likely many, many degrees stronger. So, if you're generous to the guy, he's a beyond supersonic, town-destroying menace before ever turning into his final form, and even if you're not too charitable to Eren, he's still breaking the sound barrier and should be more than capable of dishing out those atomic blasts by spamming his transformations, whether his durability scales to them or not. On the flip side of the coin though, we have Kafka Hibino. Unlike Eren, where we've got some explicit measurements, complex abilities, and a totally finished narrative, Kaiju no 8 isn't exactly any of those things, in the very best way possible. The story is a lot like what would have happened if AOT never left the island of Paradise and left every other episode to focus on Levi the cleaning lady. So in saying that, I'll try to keep things brief in the action-packed spirit of things. Kaijus, like Kaiju no 8 himself, are a breed of monster with an unknown origin, and they've demonstrated most of the typical qualities you'd find in your average shonen monster, ranging from regeneration to energy blasts, acidic blood, magical barriers, and a degree of shapeshifting, which can grant other minor abilities such as flight. Along with that, because these monsters live in the modern day as opposed to the World War I era setting for AOT, they're also classified on something much more scientific called the Fortitude Scale. The Fortitude Scale takes a lot of obvious parallels from our real-world Richter scale to classify kaiju into one of many seemingly logarithmic categories. But the only important phrase to know is Dai Kaiju. This refers to any kaiju graded above an 8 out of 10, and they are the most dangerous of their species. And then, among them, are the Identified Kaiju, a group of Dai Kaiju who stand closer to a 9, and are thusly assigned with a number to monitor. And although he's still seemingly an infant, the as of yet unnamed kaiju who fused with Kafka created a new Dai Kaiju, with the fortitude rating going up to a staggering 9.8, making him the strongest of the strong. And while this fusion did come with some weaknesses, such as Kafka's heart being replaced with something called a core, which would instantaneously end his life if it were to break, the trade-off basically made him immortal as long as that thing's intact. So clearly, for the most part, the guy benefited way more than he lost. Especially since, even though he's not actually any taller than a regular person, causing him to be dwarfed by most other kaiju, Kafka's physical strength doesn't really suffer, as he basically Saitamas his way through 90% of the other kaiju he meets. In fact, I don't exactly think you needed me to tell you that Kafka definitely hits a lot harder than Eren, since as early as chapter 32, we see the guy one-punch a living atom blast out of its effective range, despite the fact that it would have destroyed everything in a square kilometer had he not smacked it away. So basically a beginning of series Kafka could sort of just slap above colossal titan-esque enemies into the atmosphere, and from there we see other numbered kaiju like himself threaten to destroy massive cities like Sapporo in a feat that would make the whole world's nuclear arsenal blush. Then add in things like kaiju putting holes in mountains, threatening to make tsunamis or earthquakes, and a whole bunch of other wacky shonen stuff, then it's just needless to say that as the top dog of all kaiju, Old Man Kafka probably backhands Eren into next week if he can touch him. And he honestly shouldn't have much trouble since Kafka has already blitzed sonic booms in the past. So any argument for our favorite shifter is gonna come from the hacks though camp. Which is honestly a fair statement considering Eren has effectively infinite prep and prior knowledge through the paths, can spam colossals on Kafka to keep him at bay, and is even sort of immortal in a way. But unless you're willing to argue Eren can connect the paths to anyone he wants, then he unironically doesn't have a way to hurt Kafka. And while his pseudo-immortality might seem like an obvious stalemate, even if we want to ignore the many clear implications that shifters can die, Eren is still subject to the curse of Ymir, which means he can't live longer than the founder herself. And since Kafka is also effectively immortal, after 4 or so years, Eren would just collapse, ending the stalemate. So yeah, Kafka Hibino wins. And I think that's exactly how Eren would want it. Now go enjoy Kaiju no 8's anime, and that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.